Okay, kia ora everybody, me te mata tatou, and thank you for coming in today to the HTK Virtual Poari. We've got a guest speaker today, Kale Panoho is joining us today, so thank you all of you who've come in to have a listen to Kale and some of his background and story. It's going to be a wonderful hour between 2 and 3 today to get to know a little bit about him, his work, and some of the cool impact that he's making out there in the world. So big mihi to Kale for coming in, but also thank you everybody for joining us today here on the virtual Poari. Also want to do a shout out to Vaughan. It's his birthday today, so big ups to old Vaughnie. Not 69 yet, but certainly
Close.
not even just still youngish, but certainly the oldest of the HTK team. So just want a quick shout out to him. But I'm going to start with our karakia whānau and then do the quick mihi meet. And then I'm going to ask the board to introduce themselves, do some housekeeping with Vern, and then I'm going to pass it over to Kale, our guest speaker today. So kia ora rā tātou. Nō reira, tuka atua tātou mihi ki a koutou, e noho nei o roto o koutou kāinga. Nā manaakitanga ki a koutou, nā whakamoemiti, nā whakawhetai, ko tai mai koutou i te kaupapa o te rā, me te tiaki o koutou whānau i roto i enei rā wanga, me enei wā mānuka, ki tiaki na tia rā tātou whānau, aha kua kihe, aha kua a rātou mahi, me kaha tātou ki te tiaki tātou ki a tātou. Nō reira kia tau nā manaakitanga nā rukiruki tēnā ki tēnō tātou. Kia mahi atu maki ka toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te rau, toi ngai tātou. Turu o, tika maua kia tēnā.
Tēnā.
I'm with you.
Tai ki.
Hey, kia ora everybody. My name is Jason Fox. I'm from Taranaki. Titoko waru te tangata, nā ruahine te iwi, Taranaki whānui, HTK advisor. And I get this wonderful job of facilitating many Māori in these virtual Poari sessions. So thank you for coming today. I'm going to shoot it over to Vaughan to introduce himself, then Pete, then circle back to Johnny and Vern. Kia ora, Vaughan.
Yeah, kia ora, Jace, and kia ora everybody else. Ko momoni atu toka ingoa, ko tainui toko waka, ko tararua tipai monga, ko hoki o te awa, ko rokoa ki te tonga te iwe, ko parirokoa te hapu, no tinare o huia, ko nā tokowaru te marae, ko te whatanui te tangata. I right now sitting in my apartment in Parnell, whānau from a little place called Hokieo Beach between Otaki and Levin, and I've been in Auckland or in the north since I was 5 years old. Got two boys, 22 and 18, live with their mum here in St Heliers, and I've been in small business advisory since 2017. Really looking forward to Kale today, so thanks for joining us, bro. And I'll try and think of some curly questions as the session rolls out to throw at you. So all the best, brother.
Good on, good everyone. Pete, born in the South Island. I'm an HTK advisor. Spent most of my life living in Auckland and Devonport, or living in Devonport now. Good part of my career was living overseas. I worked with small, medium, and large corporate organisations, and very happy to be back in New Zealand working with the HTK Group. Thank you.
Good, Pete.
Kia ora whānau, ko maunga pōhatu me panakiri ngā maunga, ko waikare tāi ke te awa, ko waikare moana te roto, ko mātātua te waka, ko ngai tū hoi taku iwi, ko Johnny Aranga taku nei ingoa. Kia ora and welcome to today's session. I'm really excited to hear some insights from Kale. Thank you, Kale, for jumping on board today, bro. It's an honour to have you. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Johnny. Kia ora, Vern.
Kia ora whānau. Ko Taranaki te maunga, ko Waitara te awa, ko Vern Holden toko ingoa. Ko te awa te iwi. Hey everyone, I'm Vern Holden. I'm one of the HTK advisors. Background 15 years in manufacturing, doing everything along the supply chain that you can do. Been involved with the team for almost a year now. Just really loving this advisory role and getting amongst all the businesses and just little cool experiences and cool stories along the way. So I'm also here to talk about how we can interact in this process.
Hey, kia ora, Vern. Kia ora, everybody. Before we ask Kale to present and introduce himself, I just want to background a little bit more about Kale and also link it back to what we're all trying to achieve in our own life and what we're trying to do in our own business. And one of the things about today is we're on the virtual board, and a big part of our life is virtual. And so Kale's really important because his skills and his insights, his ability around this digital world is incredibly important for Māori business and the economy. And so we need to be able to be open to new ideas about that. And so hopefully, you know, Kale will be able to share that, and also some of his background. And you'll find his background is a very, very cool story about his upbringing, and hard upbringing, clearly some, you know, brutal lessons that I've learned along the way. And hopefully we get Kale to share some of those, with us, and, you know, and talk about some of those great moments in business where you feel like you're winning, whether in Kale's case it's with Universal Studios or TikTok, and get him to share some of those great moments where he's winning. We also know that it's not just about biz, and Kale share some stories with us about other things that he does in terms of Te Whutaporo and some of his oranga wellbeing ideas and work. And so we're all looking forward to hearing that. So on behalf of HT Virtual Poari and behalf of Ngā Pākehī Māori, Kale, tēnā koe, tēnā koutou, nau mai, haere mai. Kia ora hoa. Over to you.
Kia ora whānau. So firstly, thank you very much for everybody. I've had an incredible intro and welcome already, but I'll jump into a small mihi. So ko Kale, yeah, how do we go through this? I think I'll start here. Ko Ngapuhi te iwi, ko Kale tuku ingoa. And so the next part that I'm going to talk about a little bit comes back to some of my story and some of the things that I'm thinking of. So the first part is ko Kupuwai tuku maunga, ko Marahia tuku awa. So key piece for me and for whānau, for when they think about this, I'm Ngapuhi, but I've only just recently discovered what that means. A few things that I just announced is I just said my maunga is obviously here in Otago. I live in Dunedin, for those who don't know, Otipuri. I grew up in central Otago, and the key pieces that I'm going through now and discovering for me for what it means to be Ngapuhi, what it means to actually go and find my what my iwi are, where they're from, my whare, my maunga, my awa. A lot of what I've considered and what I've been thinking for home for a long time has been central Otago, where I grew up. Grew up in a small place called Alexandra. Not a lot of people know where that is, but near Queenstown, near Cromwell, and we've got a large orchard and sort of sharing community, but very low Māori population, third smallest in New Zealand when I was growing up there. And so for me, just some background, I have a Māori dad. He is over in Australia. And growing up, one of the things that I never really had any instinct or connection to was my father. He left when I was about 4 to 5 years old. And so didn't have a huge connection, didn't know what it meant to be Māori, and still exploring and understanding what that actually is today. And I moved over to New Zealand when I was 10 years old. My mum, she was on the benefit and still was raising me at the time. Going through that process and growing up, we learned a few things. One, my first experience was obviously understanding what the difference was between growing up, I guess, white and growing up Māori. My first experience with sort of racism was in Alexandra. And I had my first difference or understanding for what it meant to be Māori when I had someone say, "Oh, you're one of those brown boys." And my first actual ever thinking when I came over to New Zealand was that, one, I didn't think there was any difference for me being Māori and what that actually meant. But the second piece of it was, you know, do you know the first piece of where your maunga actually is? And I've been saying that my maunga for a long time was Kupuwai, which is in Central Otago, and I had my first interaction. This was probably when I was 15. They're like, "Look, that's not where you're from. There's nothing to do with what you actually understand." And then they're like, "Did you know where your iwi is?" And I was like, "No." And I was saying my last name, Panoho. So at the time, even saying that out loud, saying that with someone else who was Māori, and this was one of the sharers I was working with, he was like, "Bro, like, you're doing that horribly. Stop saying it." And he said to me, he's like, "Look, I don't think you're doing that right." And he's like, "But I don't know because I don't know your iwi." And he's like, "So I don't want to offend you." But he's like, "I think you're doing it wrong." And fast forward to today, I've probably only in the last sort of 2 to 3 years learned how to say my last name properly. I've been involved with obviously finding and exploring where I guess I'm actually from, and it's still a journey that I'm on. But coming through to that, I think obviously from here, growing up in Central Otago for as much as Liz with one parent who was still on a benefit, and she's been diagnosed with bipolar. It was a pretty tough gig. I grew up in sort of not so much in poverty, but certainly a few gaps between needing a few things and then getting some of them, and having that gap between how to work to get them, what did that mean, and how do we do it? And the second part, obviously, is when I came down here and looking at through there, is I was very fortunate to grow up, I guess, in Dunedin, in Otago, and the fact that a lot of the things that were normal were, one, go to school, two, you go to university, and then three, you usually find yourself in some form of either trade if you stay in Central, or some opportunity to actually carry on. And so I think when I look back at my environment, is one, it was very white, but two, it gave me a lot of good opportunities to follow the correct path. Fast forward to today. So for me, I have sort of three ventures that I really work across. The first is K&J Growth. We founded that in 2017. And so what we do primarily, for an easy chat for everyone to understand, is digital marketing. We help companies scale and actually basically take digital tools to go online. The second is another company, e-commerce brand and SaaS company called Rugby Bricks. Everyone here, I'm hoping, is familiar with rugby. If you're not, look, I'm not even going to bother. But the second piece is we sell kicking tees. And that's primarily led us to actually building our IP around rugby. Do that with another mate, Peter Breen. And then the third piece is just another business that I'm building out, which is called Hakune. And so for that there, that just means the method. And a mate of mine, me and Reece Jeffrey, we're building that on a blog to sort of help entrepreneurs in terms of, here's how to scale, here's some of the things that we've done, and here's what we are. The highlight reel for us at the moment, K&J, we now have a team of 26 between contractors from an office in LA to here in Dunedin. We've got general manager here in New Zealand. We have a few other staff around here. And then we have a full global team, obviously with another partner, Jonathan Maxim. And then the key piece, we've worked with companies. So TikTok, Digital Boost is another initiative that we've helped run with MB. And then from there, we've been able to work with companies like Universal Studios, Comcast, and a few ranges of brands, right from startup, so literally starting a gym out of nowhere, through to now working with like those large companies. The second, obviously, Rugby Bricks, is now we partnerships with the Storm. You know, we're both seven-figure businesses, and we've got a few team members globally and locally. And then Hakune is that last piece. But all of the stuff that I'm sharing now are key highlight reel pieces. The stuff to get here has come from starting when I went to university, studied to be a personal trainer, graduated from there, then went to uni, and then actually picked up biochemistry, carried on through, took a gap year, worked in a startup, made a fair bit of cash, and was really blown away from my first year ever working out of university that you could make money inside of tech and selling things. Fell in love with that, got picked up for another job where I was recruited to be the sales manager, and then I was fired within 90 days. And so in the inverse of some of these things and the stuff that I'm talking about and where I've been presented as an expert, I want to sort of show and share the reality of that. Like, a lot of where I'm doing and going to talk about today are all habits and tactics that I've picked up from a relatively average background, but they've all been learned. They're things that I think everyone else can adopt. And the highlight reel that I'm on now that other people show and display and talk about are all the result of building better habits. So I think that's a relatively good intro to me, where I'm from, and then enough to sort of give the context for where we started.
Oh, hey, kia ora, Kale. Tino pai. Thank you for backgrounding the journey back into Te Ao Māori and across the tribes. There are many young people who, for whatever reason, have found themselves out of the loop. And the beautiful thing about Te Ao Māori is that in the end, it comes looking for you, whether you like it or not. So thank you for thank you for backgrounding that.
Yeah.
And so as we're thinking about some of those hard lessons that were learned, like I got, the first sales manager job, 90 days in, then out. Some of those hard lessons that you learned along the way, but you obviously had that cool experience after university where you had a bit of an early win. And it's always nice to get an early win in anything we do, whether it's business, rugby, or netball, or whatever. It sort of starts burning a bit of a momentum. So tell us a little bit about some of those moments where you were getting battered around a bit, particularly in that moment where you found yourself, you probably weren't a very good employee.
Yeah, I was a dick. The context for that there is essentially, so my gap year between university and potentially going back is I ended up in a company called Education Perfect. Had a relatively good role there where I was selling EdTech, so education technology. And I did okay. I wasn't bad at selling. Turned out I was pretty good and made close to a pretty good fair wicket near the 6-figure mark. Did that for a year and a half, and I thought, awesome, like the world's my oyster. I've never ever seen that much money in my bank account or any of my whānau's bank account. So the key piece at that stage was like, man, what can't I do? The next role that I was picked up from was called for entertainment book. I don't know how many people know or have heard of what that is, but I think there's a few head nods going around. Basically allows you to get a cheaper meal with some of the restaurants we partner. And so I was picked up as a sales manager there. And they sort of shoulder tapped me and said, cool, we'd love you to come on board. And look, I wasn't bad at selling, but they gave me people to look after. And I was terrible at doing that, just awful. So the key piece my main motive of advice was I was going out and selling. And I had some other people in the office that I was working with. And my key advice to them for how to sell better was you should sell better. And if you're trying to foster other people, that's really horrific advice. And the thing is too, I was really too busy looking at how great I was doing as opposed to understanding and helping people. And so my shock came pretty much when I'd taken a weekend. I'd had my auntie's funeral. I'd gone away for that, and I came back the next Monday. And essentially, I wasn't fired per se, but my 90-day trial was ended immediately. It came in, my stuff was in a box, and I was like, oh, they were cool. And they're like, hey, your stuff's here. We'll need your work phone back. No one was there to do it. They just bought my stuff out. And then was at that point, that's when I had a real crash. I'd run head first, probably to that point in the fact with my ego. At the stage of life I'd been doing is for the parts that I'd gone through, or the things for me and my career and my journey, is that it had mostly been linear or upward. And the fact I had a pretty tough upbringing, but it didn't affect me. Schoolwork wasn't too bad. Managed to get to uni. Had mostly hit successes and milestones along the way. Wasn't bad at footy. Played for Otago Bees, and most of the stuff I'd done had been successful. And I'd been only telling myself the narrative that, cool, look, you're going to be the best thing since sliced bread. And I'd really drunk the Kool-Aid, for lack of a better term. And, you know, that first piece of crashing headfirst into that was, I was like, man, I've got to make some huge changes.
This is cool. This is cool, Kale, because this ego lesson in business and in life, if we get it really early, and we catch it, we know what it is, then we can really accelerate from there if we can catch it. And so would you have said that the moment where they said don't come back after that 90 days and put your stuff in a box, was that your ego moment? Was that one of the starting ego moment? And from there, was there another one? Was there another big one where you realize, actually, shit, I've got to stop believing in my own hunger. I might have to take a back lesson here. Was there any other moment as you started cruising on from there and thinking about your own businesses where you got a really good whack in the face? You had a plan and you got smacked in the face. And tell us about it.
So, yeah, that's almost daily. The latter part. And I'll go through for what that is and what it means. So there's a cool philosophy that I follow, and I picked up for those who can maybe see this. I think, yeah, that might be a bit of the way. That says the obstacle is the way. It's tattooed on my arm. It's based on Stoic philosophy. There's a key piece in Stoic philosophy, and Stoicism being that philosophy that talks about katabasis, which is hitting ground zero, pretty much failing, and the only way to go is up. I picked up that book at a very key pivotal time, and I was really lucky to pick it up early. And that philosophy in itself is pretty much the ability to look at and say to the world, look, I only want to act on the things that I can change. Everything else is superfluous, right? And so the key piece, like you've asked, is like what's happened since then.
Okay, should we let him in, whānau? I don't know. Is that a yes or a no? Yes. Let's take a vote on that. Okay. We took a quick vote, Kale, and we voted that you could come back in. So
Oh.
So you were just talking about stoicism, and for those who are not familiar with stoicism, it's kind of like the idea that you need to go through pain in order to get a lesson. And anyway, that's my rough meaning of it. But Kale, you might want to also describe it, because you've described it as the obstacle is the way, and that is a very sort of All Black rugby type, almost mantra in life, isn't it? Maybe just stay on that a little bit longer.
Yeah, cool. So I think for Stoicism and the path, when you look at a lot of these key things around philosophy and thinking, and getting to those key parts, is first one is that ability to obviously say, I only want to change and work on the things that I can control. So everything else that's external, I just have no say on that. And so there's no reason for me to get upset, frustrated, or deal with those things in any manner. Like, because if something's happened and you're getting frustrated about it, your frustration will not change the outcome. Do you know what I mean? You have no ability to change what's already happened to you. And so your reaction to it, if you've got to choose between being happy, vigilant, or carrying on versus getting pissed off, I know the one that you want to go down and follow. And so that key piece to obviously looking at these areas is that we're going to come across stuff all the time. There's obstacles, impediments, and huge issues in our lives every single day.
How do you very easy to come off like you're being dismissive. Oh yeah, that does.
Is anyone else lost him? Was it just me?
He's gone.
Yeah. He looks very passionate though. I think something exciting's about to happen.
If he pokes out his tongue, he's good at pukana.
He couldn't handle the heat in the kitchen.
Yeah. Do you want to just continue on where you were,
bro? Going, bro. He'll be back.
Yeah, cool. I think, yeah, so for the kōrero where I was going to there, and this piece is looking at the small micro habits that you adopt to obviously being indifferent to certain things that come up each day require a whole lot of practice and patience. And for me, there were things that I didn't have previous to this. And so it required a whole lot of meditating each day, learning micro habits to actually deal with it, and then reading key outcomes of, well, look, if I'm going to be annoyed at something, or if I'm going to be frustrated at it, and I've got an option, why would I be anything but happy? You're back, bro.
Am I back now, am I?
Yep.
I was just trying to get you to stay on that point where, you know, it's in our minds when we're driving on something. It's very easy to sort of put everything aside and stay focused on the one thing.
Oh, yeah.
But people see that as, oh, this guy's disinterested in what I'm saying, right? And you run the risk of not being in the present for others. And I just sort of circle back on that, because it's that fine line, isn't it, of being very focused, but still being present to hear people. And yeah, get you to talk about that as well.
Yes, I think when you've got any capacity for looking at that is, if you, in that context, if you're looking at the exclusion of negative emotions or getting rid of some of those key things that, like you mention or talk about, obviously saying, hey, if you're focused on just doing this and excluding some of these other things, it may make you not available. The inverse is obviously true, because as you empty out bad, negative outcomes where that you have no control over. And so, for example, as just this morning, late for a meeting, missed an important startup for a client and missed some relatively key information. Now, I could get pissed off and frustrated about that and then brood on that for 5 minutes, as opposed to flipping the coin and saying, cool, that time's wasted. That event and outcome has happened. I have no ability to change it. What I do have the ability to do is turn up and be more empathetic, listen harder, and then hopefully regain some of these things. And so the exclusion of negative stuff is that most of us are carrying something where we're going to be frustrated, annoyed, or pissed off about. Ultimately, if you're going to use some ability to look at a way and get rid of some of those things, it makes you more available. And I think the thing with Stoicism for this part of it, and when I talk about philosophy in that front, is you have the inability to change the past. And so your emotions, when you're getting frustrated about any of them, you then exclude those and say, cool, I can't change it. It makes you more empathetic and available to listen, because you then don't have to be stuck with things that are going through. And there's a really cool concept called attention residue. It's by a researcher. Her name is Sophie Leroy. And for anyone who wants to look it up, basically what happens is when you spend one time on one task and then you switch to another, it shows that the residue from the previous task carries on through. And so for you to minimize your ability of obviously not getting stuck on so many things is that you then have the ability and the capacity cognitively to turn up and be more empathetic, listen, and be available for whatever next task you want to be with.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that attention residue. I like that phrase. We do tend to carry a lot of stuff into the next meeting, and our ability to reset, reframe is clearly helpful. And when you were thinking about resetting and reframing as you were coming out of an employee and moving now back into the world you're in, there was clearly large changes that were happening in digital. There were a beginning of a New Zealand that was thinking more about how to raise money in it, how to be successful in it, and you're sort of entering in at some of those, some almost the early stages of that. Huh?
Yeah, I think so. One of the biggest benefits that happened with me, and for those who don't know, there's a gym in Cromwell called Central Fitness, and one of the things that first sort of got me on the map around what would be considered a term, growth hacking. That's where K&J came from, K&J Growth hacking. And I'll explain that term a little bit. Is in the late 2000s, companies like Facebook, Airbnb were using these tools to basically go through Dropbox and have digital online presences and scale their businesses rapidly fast and gain new customers by doing things like having viral referral campaigns, having network effects for the companies that they built. And all this was doing was basically using things that referred it. So viral sharing, right? The first thing of Dropbox that they did really, really well was, hey, here's your email, you sign up, you get a free account on Dropbox and you get 50 megabytes of free storage online. And so if you share this, you'll get another 50 megs free, right? And so that concept in itself was a landing page that then generated just under, I think it was 180,000 users in the space of a month. And so concepts like that, when you think of things, how each of these key pieces are, that was growth hacking, and that was really prevalent in the US. Now, coming back to the gym in Central Otago, I've written a case study on this of how we said we spent $200 and we turned it to $202,000 of annual revenue in 14 days. The title sounds fancy and it was pretty exciting, but what we did is in Central Otago, there was one other gym in the town, Cromwell, and we basically got a space there. And in the weekend, we were like, cool, we want to open a gym. We don't want to spend $80,000. We need to find out if we want to get members to come. And so basically we navigated and negotiated with a property owner there and said, look, can you give us the space? We want to rent it for the weekend. And if it works out, we'll open a gym here. And saying, look, we'll have a lease for obviously 3 years. And this is how we want to do it. And so what we did is we stuck up A3 and A4 pieces of paper in the busiest parts of town in an empty business slot. And then we got basically small town influencers. So people like the local rugby captain, the doctor, the cycling team, to then go on their social media and share, hey, there's going to be a potential gym opening here this weekend. Go through, register interest. If they get enough numbers, they'll sign up. And so context for that, we ended up signing 205 members. We opened roughly around about 8 months later. We now got 4 gyms across the country. And so I published a story of exactly how we did it, what were the budgets, what did it look like, and that got picked up by things like Forbes, Inc. magazine. And the best part when it's getting picked up by international publications is you get exposure to people who think differently internationally. And so similar to what was happening with things like growth hacking was in those late 2000s, I was chatting with people in the US at around about 2016, where a lot of these concepts that I'm discussing now were just bread and butter. People were doing it all the time. People were going through it. And so one of the key pieces that I think and what I want to talk about is we have a lot of great opportunity inside of New Zealand, but if we're looking to grow and expand and support Māori growing internationally, we want to look overseas to see where the innovations are coming in. And so for me, I wrote for a publication called Influensive, and I ended up bidding where a client came in for, basically they were looking for someone to run a campaign for the University of Delaware. I bid against another guy. He got one part of the contract, I got the other. I did the PR, he got the digital marketing. His name turned out to be Jonathan Maxim. he and I turned out to film a business after that, and we said, hey, what did you do better than I did? And he talked about how he structured his marketing campaign, what were the growth things that we did. And then I said, hey, here's what I did for the PR. And together we decided, cool, let's form a business and grow together. And so he was based in Philadelphia at the time. We decided to make a company that is now called K&J, not very original at all. But from there, the key pieces there and looking at this was we were able to actually take a lot of the innovation that I had seen overseas, and I was very lucky to be able to apply it here. And so when the market's this far behind, I looked very, very innovative, and I was doing some cool stuff that most people hadn't thought of in the digital marketing realm. But essentially what I was doing was borrowing from other people who were a bit smarter than me.
Wonderful. So that's a wonderful story that, and I suppose it's the simple idea that, particularly go back to your gym, is that you can sell a lot of things without actually having it in the first instance. And you can create an environment and a vibe that you haven't actually even put a single barbell into the gym. It's a really good reminder about how far can you push the consumer in terms of their immediate appetite, and how long can you delay it for. And so you'll know in New Zealand, if you went in and tried to buy a couch or something now, you don't get it for 3 to 4 months. I mean, this is almost like the accepted business model. And so I think it's a really helpful idea, that how long can you push the appetite of the consumer where it's still reasonable, and you're still creating and painting a vision for them. So that's really helpful. The second thing is these good ideas that are coming out of other parts of the world. How long would you say we are behind when you're looking at places like the US and Europe? What's your view? What's happening there?
Yeah, look, in all honesty, possibly a minimum of 5 to 10 years. I think the acceleration has changed rapidly due to COVID. And for those who have some familiarity, Digital Boost is a really good initiative by the government to increase literacy in digital for Kiwis. But one of the things that's very rarely covered that I'm spending a lot of my time on at the moment is just Web3 technology. So cryptocurrencies, blockchain, the exchange of these types of new assets and building it. And so a couple of the companies that we're working with in the US, publicly traded ones, a lot of their strategies are evolving around, cool, how do I introduce an NFT to the market? And for those who have never heard of them, that means non-fungible token, something that's trading on blockchain. And a part of their key pieces for a lot of the missions for some of these companies is how do I have some form of currency or blockchain offering, right? For the most part, is when I discuss any form of or have a correlato with most people around blockchain or NFTs. We've just released one for Rugby Bricks. Most people are like, what? I've got no idea what that means. Could you even walk me through it? And so there's a huge gap there where we've got this opportunity, I think, for Kiwis and for us, is now that we're all so focused online, is to jump and grab some of that technology. But we've got a long way to go.
So there's been a bit of work on indigenous cryptocurrencies and thought about that. And yeah, give us your view about that in terms of the way you think cryptocurrencies are working, whether it could be expanded out to that kind of diverse consumer group, or whether it is actually more a Rugby Bricks kind of specialized, hey, smaller communities, tokens that kind of that shine within particular lights. And yeah, give us a feel about what you're thinking about that.
Yeah, so I think if we have a look at going pretty macro, and I want to go quite wide on this for most people, is most things get closer to democratized. And so I want to start with going back to early 90s and look at the first piece of private cars. Now, private cars were something that only the super rich, quite famous people had, and politicians were using. Now, if we fast forward to the 2000s and we get the introduction of Uber, and we say, okay, cool, everybody to that extent is now starting to get private cars. And so if you look at it from the top point, is that, look, the wealthy and the rich had an example of this was only for us, and then a product or an innovation came in that made it for everybody. And so if we think of money in an aspect of where that is, the current control sits with a central bank. They have the ability to create and generate money, whereas now a cryptocurrency is essentially the democratization of money. If we think about it on a really large scale, central banks are creating currencies, fiat. A cryptocurrency can be created based on a blockchain and then traded value in that, right? And so the key piece that I think for us, for people, and the way that currencies exist is there's going to be that transition from something that was really privately held by an elite few to, cool, the power of transition has gone to multiples. And so if you think of most of the innovation of products and you think of everything from social media, you think, okay, cool, rock stars, movie people, politicians, those are the people who had huge fame. Those are the people who started out having a huge influence on our population, what we did and how we interacted and what that meant. And then now, if you look at social media today, we have influencers. Everybody can build their own audience. Everybody can be famous. And so all of these key things go from macro down to the micro, and it's the product innovation in between, or the companies that help do that. And so I think for us, that's probably the next part of where we're headed. And then on the other flip side and inverse, for anyone who's even close to the NFT market or understanding what that is and what that looks like, firstly, 99.9% of NFTs are going to be worthless. I think we're currently in sort of a bubbly type of place with people who are bringing stuff to market. The key thing, if you're looking to produce any form of blockchain technology or an NFT offering, is how can I add something that's going to be low cost to us that helps increase the customer satisfaction, right? And so that key piece for me is an NFT is the ability for us to give an offering in a digital sense that then allows us to actually help our customers. And so the reason we've built out an NFT is, cool, what's a relatively inexpensive method to give the extra novelty for our customers that's not going to cost us much, but also to produce and go into a direction that we think most of the economy is headed, which is blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and where we think the world will probably be headed in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, it's one of those beautiful, always delicate decisions of biz where we're trying to paddle out to a wave that we hope is actually the right wave to catch. And we don't know whether we're too early, too late, but we know it's kind of coming. And cryptocurrency is a really good example of that. Like, we know that there is a currency that effectively might change the way we think about transacting. And then at the same time, we have this feeling that the Māori community is so far behind that I don't know if I should spend too much time there, because my consumers, the people who might be using that cryptocurrency, actually might be outside of my networks and my relationships. And so I've got to take a big swim out of my normal field of life in order to really see how far I could push that. And so it's fabulous that you're thinking about cryptocurrency, you're thinking about those tokens as another way to transact. And so circling back to your nuggets for today, it would be to get us to think about tokens as a future in terms of collaboration and or the way we might be thinking about our business.
Yeah, I mean, a bit to an extent, but what I think broadly and what I want all of us to start thinking about is the change of pace. So I don't know how many people here were born in the 90s, but if you look at the first, when you grew up from, if I was born in 1990, I'm 30, and so 1990 to 2000s, we were woken up by an alarm clock. You'd get up, you'd watch TV, and for the most part, for those, I imagine for the people who were working during that time, you would go to work, you'd have some sort of commute, you would then check your email, and at the time, it was still sort of a novelty. 2000 to 2010s, the change of pace was going through and having a look, okay, cool. Email was becoming the normal form. And what you'd have a look at then is there's more digital communication. There was more peer-to-peer stuff. There was rise of some social networks. But if we look at now, like the change of life from the 70s up to the 2000s wasn't that different. People would wake up, they'd have alarm clocks, they'd do the same stuff. If you look at where we are right now in terms of even how we date, like at any point in time where people would date just by swiping through an app would be a monumental change, right? Because people would previously, the way you'd meet someone would be through church, could have been through school, could have been through work. But if you have a look at it there, just that one change would have been an incredibly huge innovational change in where we look at it. But if we're doing this now, this Kōrero, it's all online. This has become the norm. Digital communication, the way we wake up, the first thing we wake up to is our phones. Well, then what do we check? We check some form of social media. We go through, we read our headlines via digitally. If we think about this and the change and the rate of change, the future that we have and we're looking towards is going to be hugely different, and the change of that pace is going to be a lot faster. And so for Māori and Indigenous cultures, and for all of us thinking about this, is that the way we lived for 30 years wasn't different. The last rate of change and pace of what the future looks like is going to be significantly faster and a significantly big change for where we are. And that's the piece there, is that people haven't found or looked and seen, okay, cool, where we were in history, there wasn't much innovation change from the 70s to the 2000s. There was political changes, but then you go from 2010s to right where we are right now. This has become the norm. Peer-to-peer communication has become through doing this. Micro communities can emerge. I've probably got more in common with the group of you than I do with either neighbor, either side of me. We're not living proximity-wise. We don't have proximal connections for the way that we used to. And so for us and how we're thinking about it is that that rate of change is something that we want to take advantage of.
Yeah, I really like that point about proximity. Like our whole view of proximity and definition of proximity has changed. The idea of a neighbor is no longer a definition anymore that holds up from what we know, and so we have to revisit our relationships, even how we see tribes, our own tribal connections, and think potentially, could there be such thing as my own tribe in a virtual world that I don't have whakapapa to? Could I have the same love, passion? And of course, the answer to that is probably that's exactly the kind of potentially relationship I need to think and present myself in if I'm really committed to building and or being connected to a new network and relationship. That it's almost tribal like, it's almost whakapapa like, it's almost doesn't have proximity but can span, you know, islands, countries, and so forth. I just want to come back because we've got only 10 minutes to go, and if you've just joined us, whānau, we've got Kale Panoho, who is one of Māori's leading lights out there in the digital space, not just because he's got into a couple of magazines, but because you actually do some hard yards. You know, you do some yards and you make some mistakes and you get up again, and you develop a philosophy like Stoicism to remind you that you got to have a few bumps in life. The obstacle is the way, and you would have seen his tāmoko there on his arm to remind him about that. And so for us, also in the last sort of 10 minutes, this is an opportunity for Māori businesses as well for any partai and any comments. So going to keep that open. But also in the last 10 minutes, we're going to ask Al to sort of also provide some last golden nuggets and to share some of those. We've already heard about proximity. We've heard about tokens. We've heard about the idea that if you're thinking of growing and being in digital space, accept that this is an ongoing and quick and fast changing world that you really have to catch the bus on and not get left at the bus stop. So we've got Te Miringa Parks going to would like to ask a Pātai, so I'm just going to open up to Te Miringa. Yeah, Pātai,
No,
like Te Miringa.
thank you. I heard you say you had an e-commerce, so this is kind of based on e-commerce model. I don't necessarily know what you sell, but my question is, how do you digitally and on social media really connect and engage with your audience? Like, how do you create those fans that are obsessed with you as a brand rather than just come, buy, go? So how do you kind of create that community as e-commerce?
Yeah, awesome question. And I think this is evolving for what it is that social media is ubiquitous now. So for all of us, we've got some form of social media channel, but it's really hard for people to go through and differentiate who's the brand, who's an influencer, who's a follower, and then how do I build authentic communities. So the first thing I'd look at, and a fundamental underlying piece for this, is a piece by a guy named Kevin Kelly. He talks about 100 true fans or 1,000 true fans. And a key piece would be starting and reading that. But the second part too is, how do you personalize your connection? And so the key piece for this is obviously anytime you have a DM from an influencer, that's slightly more personal. But if you're looking at this, and I'm an e-commerce company, one of the things that we're doing with Rugby Bricks is we're building a Discord community. So we've got a relatively large following. We have over 250,000 followers across our platforms, but what we're doing is we're taking a lot of the personalized stuff, taking it off those social media platforms, putting it into another media platform so we can communicate directly with our customers and literally helping them create it. The second piece is actually helping your customers when they say, hey, look, love what you're doing, chatting with them individually when you create that sub-community and you own something like that is getting them to help you innovate and build your own product. People really want to help and see you succeed. The biggest thing that happened with Airbnb and their biggest growth pathway is for them, they went and stayed with their first 10 customers. And literally one of them that gave it, the customer gave them their product roadmap for how they built out the rest of that company. And so that's a really famous story. But for a key piece for all of us in e-commerce is that if you've got someone who's coming to your store, buying for you, at the end, after they've done that post-purchase, say, hey, join our Slack community. Slack's an easy way, Discord's usually not one, or join our other community, and then get them there so you can actually have those personal discussions. Because every time your customer talks to you, they're probably wanting to improve your product or at least have some form of communication with you.
Ka pai iho. So we're just on the kaupapa of networks and relationships and how we might think of our networks. And we had Fraser say, hey, I don't even know my neighbors, let alone building a relationship. And the truth about that is that doesn't actually matter anymore, does it? You don't need to know the person next door. In fact, they're probably not part of your tribal community anyway. They're probably not part of your network in your community. And so even this word fan is actually inaccurate, isn't it, Kale? You're not looking for fans, are you? You're not looking for someone who just mihi to the haunga that you've got. That you're actually looking for something a lot more than just some kind of raving kind of hand clapper that, you know, claps every time they see you.
Yeah, and I agree with that, right? And the piece here is that anytime you can have a kōrero like this, you can have this conversation is that when you share something, someone else sees value in it, but they also want to be able to come back and improve what you're saying, right? And there's a two-way piece of discussion. An influencer is saying, here's what I'm giving to my audience, and this is what I'm doing. A community involves two-way communication. And so that's the key piece here is that if we're looking to do it and you're wanting to create a bigger audience, cool, go through and do that and use things like social media to scale out and get an audience. But the people that you actually want to connect with and build a community around, that part for where you go through is bring them in, get them close to you and have the one-to-ones, have these conversations where other people are doing it. And then also what happens is you'll bring a like-minded community together too. And that's the other piece is that when you have these people chatting offline, you'll find connections where you can then work alongside other people too.
Ka pai, Kale. We've got Thomas Parkoti. Thomas is our in-resident young and most able digital influencer. And so if he asks a question, it probably means it's basically HTK's question. So Tom, are you there?
Yeah, kia ora. Kia ora, Kale. Loving the kōrero, bro, and what you've talked about so far. I guess it's kind of a selfish question with my own stuff, but it could also give a bit of value to the other Pākehā. What would your advice be for businesses, especially small businesses looking to grow, who kind of are hesitant to step into the digital world or aren't using it as best as they can and kind of use the excuse like they over romanticize all the old school ways of doing things, and they kind of use the excuse of, oh, well, you know, it's not quite my space, or they're hesitant because of fear of judgment, fear of opinions, all that kind of stuff. How do you kind of get over that? And then the second question would be,
well, that's quite good. I think we just got the first question to Tom, so let's get Kale on that first question.
Yeah, cool. Hopefully not saying that about HTK, but globally, when I look at the first part there, when I think of this in the scenario here is a really common one, but you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so typically for what it's looking like here is that when you hang around other people who reinforce your ideas, you're basically putting yourself in a silo and going down that road. So for the people that are saying, hey, look, I'm afraid to adopt, I'm afraid to change, usually the biggest thing is you're afraid to hang out with other people who have different thoughts. And so the biggest part that I always try and get people to go down and have this road is I want to be like, hey, doing what this digital company is, ask and find who are the people that look like them that I can spend my time with that then will allow me to learn from them. Because ultimately that's what all of this is that we're learning from other people, but each new concept that you get to go through is okay, cool. How do I get their ideas? And then how do I actually spend more time around them? Because I'll start to adopt the habits that they have.
Yeah, it's a pretty helpful response to that. You know, think about the 5 people around you, and you're probably the average of all 5. I like that idea about getting trapped in your own little community and whānau and not venturing out. And so the digital world is basically seems to be just a reflection of our own kind of limits on ourselves, just to move out and check out different environments, different places to live, different communities, different businesses, and just sort of, you know, submerge yourself into something different that's not your normal circle, and you'd be surprised what you find in there. We got Vaughan with a partai too. We've only got 4 or 5 minutes talking to Kale Panoho today, so if you've got a partai, please enter in, put your hand in and hand up, and let's get a partai in the last few minutes. Kia ora, Vaughan.
Yeah, kia ora, Jason. Kia ora, Kale. Hey, and that was really insightful, kōrero, bro. My question is actually an extension of where I think Thomas might have been going, and it's a cry for help for small business owners looking for a digital marketing partner. The digital marketing arena is notorious for its cowboys, big on small, talk small on results, and a real giveaway is the overuse of buzzwords, like scale, funnels, leads, punnet, data-driven, and dare I say it, growth hacking. So here is my first question, bro. Actually, it's my only question. When a small business is looking for a digital growth partner, what tips or advice can you give for a small business on how they can tell the difference between a digital marketing partner and a digital marketing bullshitter?
Yeah, awesome question. And it's one, so for the digital boost and going through what the government did, is one of the things that I've gone is I created a full video around how to find the right digital partner. So I'll go through, and then there's just 3 key things that I usually look for. The first is educate yourself on what the key outcome is. So it's really easy for buzzwords to pop up and then you be impressed if you don't know what the buzzwords mean. Because I can say, cool, I'm data driven, we test everything, and then what we do is we produce really rapid scalable results. Fantastic, that sounds really great. How do you do that? Or what does that even mean? And so the first piece is obviously going through, and one of the parts that I do is if you're going to outsource something in your business, make sure that you've done it at least once yourself so that you have a basic understanding so that you don't get taken for a ride. The second is anytime that you go through and look for a digital marketing partner, ask to talk to their last 3 customers. And so, hey, could you give me an introduction to your 3 customers and get their honest feedback? So the same way that you want to look at this is we buy from people we know, like, and trust. If they can't give you 3, then literally go the other place, because you know that they haven't got a good enough track record and they haven't been around long enough to produce 3 good customers, because they're not going to give you the bad ones. They're going to give you your 3 best. They can't produce at least 3 of those. They're horrific. And then the last piece that I look at for doing this when I think about digital and going through it is actually choose what's the return on investment that I want. So lots of people, and I see this mistake all the time, is, hey, I need to scale digitally. But what they don't understand before they come into this is that if I'm investing another $1, I need to build that margin into my product. And so let's say I'm paying $1,000 for someone a month. What I need to do is find that other $1,000 in my product margin. And then I need to say, cool, if I'm doing that, I want to have a return of $3 on that. People aren't factoring in the cost of that. And so you're saying, cool, I'm losing $1 of profit to have this person. That means I need to sell either X more units, or I need to get a greater return on ad spend for the stuff that they're doing.
Kia ora, bro. Nice.
I can't hear you, bro. But
there's no more question. There was no more questions, Vaughan. Okay, we'll put that hand down, because I think, Whānau, if Vaughan gives you a window to talk, take it, because Vaughan is very good at filling that oxygen up. And so we've got a couple of minutes left, Whānau, just for Kale and for the last partai. But we've been talking today about how you might be able to identify a kaka design outfit and something that might be of value to you, but there's a bit of homework required in that. There's also a little bit of, hey, tell us who your clients are and your customers are. Let's have a chat to them. But also circling back to the golden nuggets of the last hour. When we started, we talked about Kale's journey around having a certain attitude about business in general, and having a sort of stoicism-like attitude where you're going to hit some obstacles all the time, and being refreshed about that, trying to get in a better state so you can be present. And the quicker you can change your state and be more present without thinking about all of those residues from the last conversation you might have had, the quicker you can deal in particularly in the digital world. We also discussed a little bit about, hey, there are some large waves that are here and are continuing to come. And that is your ability to be fabulous and brilliant in the digital world. If you haven't caught that, then you probably shouldn't be on this call. 20 years ago, we built the first software product to learn Te Reo. 20 years ago. And 20 years on, if someone had said, oh, no, cryptocurrency is not coming, okay, well, you're probably going to miss that one too. And so it's not so much whether it's coming, it's more, do I have the patience? And do I have the tenacity? Do I have the longevity to continue to work and grow my expertise in these waves that are coming? Do I have more than 10 no's in me? Or do I have more than 5 friends? And so we got some diamonds here that you are the average of 5 friends, which is a really good reminder to get out and figure out new relationships and new networks that are going to challenge you on your ideas on things. And so Kale's given us a wonderful reminder about that, is that your total sum in your mind is actually not enough for today. You've got to continue to grow and seek new relationships. And it's wonderful to hear Kale's American relationship that was formed, not because because we're pretty cool Māori Indigenous peoples, but he had something awesome to contribute to the relationship. And that's the part that it was great to hear from you, Kale. So on behalf of all the Māori businesses here, going to give you the last say, Kale, in the last minute, and then I'm going to close with our karakia and mihi to everyone that's come here to join us today. So kia ora, Kale, last say of the day.
Yeah, so thank you. Anyone who's taken the time to do any professional development like this, I know we're all busy, and the value of our time is it's our only non-renewable resource. And so the application of it here is really valuable. And so I do want to say thank you to everybody on that. And I think the last piece for this is that key piece comes to, you're the average of those 5 people you spend the most time around. And so be around the people who are striving, wanting to get better, learning, and then adopting new thoughts and habits that are the direction that you want to go.
Well, might get you to put that arm up again, because I think that's one of those great tohus about obstacles. Don't let those obstacles get in your way, whānau, and yeah, keep looking for new whakapapa, new connections and new relationships. So nā manakitanga kia koutou, tēnā ki koe te rangatira ko Kale, me Ngapuhi nui tonu, tēnei taniwha mai I te taitokorau, pūpuhi ana I Otipoti, me nā kokona o te ao, me tonu mātou ki a koe, me o kōrero mātauranga pukenga katoa e pāna ki te pai tukutuku, me te pai papaho, me te ipurangi, whakaiwhia mai te atāhu o nā kupu kōrero I tēnei rā. Nō reira ki a koe, me tō whānau, me nā rangatira kua tai mai I tēnei rā, ki te virtual Poari, tēnā koutou, kia ora rā tātou katoa. Nō reira kia tau nā manakitanga, nō reira ki tēnā ki tēnā tātou. Ke mahia tō maki, ke toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te reo, toi ngai tātou. Turuturu o whiti maua kia tīna.
Tīna.
Hame hui e!
Tai kia.
Kia ora, fellas. See you tomorrow, 2 o'clock on every day for virtual Poari while we're in the lockdown. Big shout out to Kale, and yeah, thank you everybody again. Kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora.